This night should have been filled with laughter, dancing, and joy. But instead, this night marked the beginning of a chilling and terrible mystery. This terrible secret would haunt an entire nation. The woman disappeared into the shadows, her last minutes of life spent in a crowded nightclub. She was seen talking to a man she had just met, and then, as if swallowed by the darkness, she vanished. The discovery of her belongings on the side of the road a few days later compounded the mystery, sparking fear and wild speculation. Her purse, shoes, and identification were found, but she was gone. The perpetrator had acted coldly and methodically. The police were shocked, the city panicked, and the families desperate. But unfortunately, the nightmare for the family was just beginning. 3 years of investigation uncovered secrets that made the blood run cold. One of the most high-profile and controversial trials in Uruguay's history raised more questions than it answered. Hey friends, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montedo, the bustling capital of Uruguay. As the youngest daughter in the Martinez family, she was cherished by her parents and formed a particularly close bond with her older sister, Claudia. The family lived in comfort thanks to their father, who worked as a senior salesman for a large international company that specialized in household appliances. Their home was filled with the luxuries of life, and this affluence allowed Natalia to grow up without material concerns. From a young age, Natalia was known to be a cheerful and friendly girl, though not much else is widely documented about her early personality. What was clear to those who knew her was the deep affection she shared with her family, especially her sister. Claudia, being older, often played the role of protector and confidant, and the two sisters were nearly inseparable. The Martinez family, as a whole, was known for their close-knit relationships, and Natalia fit perfectly into this dynamic. As Natalia grew into her teenage years, her warm and sociable nature became more apparent. She built a tight circle of friends, a group that remained loyal and close throughout the years. This group became a second family to her, individuals she could rely on and who could rely on her in return. They stuck together in times of trouble, never abandoning each other, and later described Natalia as a person who could effortlessly connect with anyone. She was never shy or hesitant, and finding common ground with strangers was a skill she mastered naturally. After graduating from high school, Natalia's social life continued to flourish. She spent more time with her friends, and they frequently attended parties, enjoying the vibrant nightlife of the area. Eventually, their adventures expanded beyond the city. The group began taking regular trips to the coast of Uruguay, indulging in the sun, sand, and sea. These vacations were filled with laughter and activity, and they relished the freedom of youth. On January 1, 2007, as Natalia turned 19, she and her friends decided to embark on another one of their adventurous getaways. To celebrate her birthday, they set off for La Paloma City, a small resort town known for its relaxed vibe and beautiful beaches. For the next 2 weeks, they stayed there, soaking in the atmosphere and making memories. On January 16th, the group made their way to a second resort, this time in the city of Rales. The plan was for Natalia to reunite with her parents and sister, who were vacationing in Paz, a nearby town. The Martinez family often took trips like this, and the locals knew them well from their frequent visits. They had a sense of belonging in these small coastal towns, always returning to the same places that made them feel at home. On January 18, just a few days before their trip was to end, Natalia and Claudia decided to take a road trip to Puna del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Paz. Their destination was a well-known local spa nestled in the Cerro San Antonio area, situated midway between the two towns. The sisters spent the day enjoying beauty treatments and pampering themselves, their minds set on capping the evening with a night of dancing at a nearby disco. They had planned to meet up with Natalia's close friends, Rosalia and Natalia Silva, for a night out on the town. However, as the evening wore on, Claudia began to feel fatigued. She decided to return to their parents and skip the party, leaving 19-year-old Natalia to carry on with their plans. Natalia, determined not to let the night go to waste, joined her friends at La Arenas Canada nightclub, a locally famous venue where they danced until the early morning hours. Around 5 a.m., as the party finally wound down, the group of friends decided it was time to head home. But before they could leave, Natalia got caught up in a conversation with Leonardo Rakovich, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore in town. The two stood near the exit, talking quietly, while Rosalia and Natalia Silva lingered nearby, waiting for their friend. The night had been long, and they were tired, but they didn't want to leave without Natalia. As the minutes ticked by and their friend's conversation stretched on, Rosalia and Natalia Silva decided to head outside and wait in the car. They figured their friend would join them shortly. After all, they had an unspoken rule. They never left anyone behind. But time passed, and Natalia still hadn't appeared. Growing restless and concerned, they decided to return to the club and see what was causing the delay. When they re-entered the nightclub, there was no sign of Natalia Martinez or Leonardo. The spot where they had been talking was empty. A sense of unease began to creep in. Natalia wasn't the type to leave without telling her friends. If there had been a change of plans, she would have called or, at the very least, told them in person. But they had heard nothing from her. The friends decided to search the club from top to bottom. They made their way upstairs to the second floor, hoping for a better view of the parking lot from the balcony. That's when they spotted Leonardo's BMW parked below. The car was running, its engine idling, and through the glare on the glass, Rosalia and Natalia Silva couldn't quite make out the details inside. However, they thought they saw movement in the passenger seat. Something or someone shifting inside the car. Their hearts raced. Something didn't feel right. The night, which had started as a carefree celebration, was now tinged with an unsettling sense of dread. The girls were growing anxious as they called out to Leonardo, hoping for some answers. They asked him about Natalia, and he calmly claimed that he was just sitting in his car with a friend at the time. He explained that after a brief conversation with Natalia inside the club, they had parted ways. He insisted he had no clue where she went afterward or why she hadn't returned to her friends. Unsure of what else to do, the girls speculated that Natalia might have already headed home. With this thought in mind, they got into the car and drove to her relatives, just 10 minutes away from the club. When they arrived outside the house, they honked their car horn softly, trying to get Claudia's attention without disturbing the entire family. But there was no response. After a few more tries, they decided to turn back and return to the club, retracing their steps to the last place they had seen Natalia. They resumed their search, scouring the area for nearly 2 hours, but their efforts were in vain. No one had any information about where she had gone, and the anxiety only grew. By 8 a.m., Natalia Silva, exhausted and distraught, finally made her way home. Though physically drained, her mind was racing with worry. She shared her concerns with her parents, fearing that something terrible had happened to her friend. They tried to comfort her, urging her to get some rest, insisting that Natalia Martinez had likely returned home safely and that there was no need to panic. Reluctantly, Natalia Silva went to bed, but the nagging fear in her heart persisted. When she awoke at 11 a.m., the same day, her worst fears were confirmed. There was still no word from Natalia Martinez. Panic set in. The entire Martinez family, alarmed and desperate, launched an immediate search for her. Her friends, equally worried, joined in. Together, they went back to the club, retracing her steps, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to her whereabouts. Unfortunately, the club was now closed, and no one in the surrounding area could provide any helpful information. They searched every corner, but nothing turned up. By 5 p.m., realizing they had exhausted all their resources, the family and friends went to the police station in Maldonado. They handed over several photos, including one from that fateful night showing the girls together at the club. This provided the police with a clear picture of what Natalia was wearing that evening, and an all-points bulletin, APB, was issued. The police began their investigation, though their initial skepticism was evident. It wasn't uncommon for young girls at parties to leave without informing friends, especially after consuming alcohol. They wondered if Natalia had simply left with a man she'd met at the club. However, Rosalia and Natalia Silva were adamant Natalia hadn't been drinking that night. In fact, she had a strong aversion to alcohol and rarely touched it. Furthermore, they firmly denied any use of illegal substances. Under pressure from both the family and Natalia's friends, the detective in charge began to take the case more seriously. The first step in the investigation was to return to the nightclub where Natalia Martinez had last been seen. By now, the club was open, but there were no CCTV cameras installed at the time, making it difficult to track her movements inside or outside the venue. While speaking with the staff, the detectives learned that a group of 3 young men had been sitting at a nearby table, and they had spent the evening trying to engage with Natalia and her friends. Rosalia and Silva confirmed that the men had been persistently bothering them throughout the night. Despite this new information, the investigators chose to focus their attention on Leonardo, the last person known to have spoken with Natalia before her disappearance. It wasn't surprising that he quickly became the prime suspect. After all, he had been seen talking with her just moments before she vanished, and the lack of leads only heightened suspicion around him. Leonardo, however, maintained his innocence. He had a reputation as a kind and mild-mannered individual, and none of his friends or acquaintances could recall a single instance of him ever displaying aggressive or cruel behavior. When questioned, he explained again that his conversation with Natalia had ended peacefully. After her friends left, she had walked down the stairs and out onto the porch, at which point Leonardo returned to his car to chat with his friend. He claimed that he saw Natalia leaving, but soon lost sight of her because he became engrossed in conversation with a friend. He had no reason to believe anything was amiss. There was no commotion, no shouting, nothing that would raise alarm. Despite Leonardo's insistence that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, detectives remained unconvinced. They decided to thoroughly investigate his BMW, the car he had driven away from the club that night. Witnesses had reported seeing a similar vehicle in various locations around the city, including on the outskirts near a wooded area. One particularly intriguing report came from a man who claimed to have seen a couple engaging in intimate activity inside a car near a lake close to the woods. The description of the vehicle matched Leonardo's BMW, and the sighting allegedly occurred on the night of Natalia Martinez's disappearance. As detectives pieced together these scattered accounts, the mystery deepened. Leonardo's version of events seemed plausible, yet the growing circumstantial evidence was impossible to ignore. The investigation was only beginning, but the clock was ticking, and Natalia's family feared the worst. The police, armed with a search warrant, thoroughly examined Leonardo's BMW. Almost immediately, they found strands of long, dark hair on the floor of the vehicle. The discovery raised hopes, and the hair was sent for forensic testing. To the detectives' surprise, it didn't match the missing Natalia Martinez. It belonged to someone else entirely. The interior of the car was also remarkably clean. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle, nothing to directly connect Leonardo to Natalia's disappearance. However, the detectives, already suspicious of him, assumed he had meticulously cleaned the car after the incident, erasing any potential evidence. This theory was even noted in their reports, adding to the circumstantial evidence against Leonardo. Still, there was nothing concrete, and it wasn't enough to warrant an arrest. Then, on January 22nd, a crucial break in the case occurred. A passerby driving along the highway on the outskirts of Paz noticed several items scattered on the roadside. Among them was a woman's purse, a wallet, and a pair of shoes. But what truly stood out was an ID card, belonging to none other than the missing Natalia Martinez. Recognizing the significance of the find, the passerby immediately contacted the police, who arrived swiftly on the scene. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation, providing the first tangible clue of Natalia's fate. However, the intense media coverage surrounding Natalia's disappearance also had its drawbacks. As the public became more engrossed in the case, wild rumors began to circulate. One particularly damaging rumor suggested that Natalia had ties to drug traffickers and had fallen victim to a violent dispute between rival dealers. These rumors were baseless, but they gained traction quickly, forcing Natalia's family to respond publicly. Her father appeared on television, vehemently denying any connection between his daughter and criminal activities. Despite his efforts, the rumors continued to spread, casting a shadow over the investigation. In addition to fueling speculation, the media frenzy led to a flood of false reports. Anonymous tips poured into the police station, each one more outlandish than the last. Some callers claimed they had seen Natalia, while others insisted they had witnessed her abduction. Still, others provided dubious details about the crime itself. The detectives, already stretched thin, were forced to investigate each lead, only to find most were dead ends. the sheer volume of misinformation severely hindered their progress. Yet the media thrived on these dramatic twists and turns, as the public's fascination with the case grew. Headlines blared with theories and sensational claims, adding pressure to an already strained investigation. Despite the setbacks, the search for Natalia intensified. Law enforcement officials, friends, family, and hundreds of volunteers scoured the countryside, hoping to find any trace of the missing woman. The area surrounding the nightclub was combed thoroughly, but no clues were found. As the days passed, the search expanded to more remote parts of Uruguay, including coastal regions and forested areas. Specialized search units, including service dogs and even military aviation, were called in to assist. The local fire department scoured sewer systems. But still, there was no sign of Natalia. By late January, the grim reality had set in for the authorities. Natalia Martinez was most likely dead. The critical 48-hour window for finding missing persons had long passed, and with no new leads, hope was fading fast. On Grand Beach, a discovery was made that briefly stirred the investigation. A bone was found. But after careful analysis, it was determined that the bone was not human, dashing the faint hopes of the searchers. Yet Natalia's family remained steadfast. They refused to give up, clinging to the belief that she was still alive, perhaps being held against her will. This hope sustained them through the grueling weeks of fruitless searches. But on February 10, 2007, their worst fears were realized. A woman's body was discovered in the dense woods near Willow Lake, just 2 miles from the club where Natalia had last been seen. The condition of the body was poor, badly decomposed after weeks exposed to the elements, but the clothing matched what Natalia had been wearing the night she disappeared. Detectives felt a sinking certainty that they had found the missing young woman. The discovery triggered memories of a previous eyewitness report. Someone had seen a couple in a car near that very wooded area, engaged in what appeared to be an intimate encounter. The sighting had occurred on the night of Natalia's disappearance, and the vehicle matched the description of Leonardo's BMW. With this new piece of the puzzle, investigators returned to their prime suspect, even as they awaited the results of the forensic examination of the body. The body was sent for a detailed autopsy, but the medical examiners faced significant challenges due to its advanced state of decomposition. 5 different forensic experts were brought in to carefully analyze the remains. Despite the difficulties, they were able to confirm that the body was indeed that of Natalia Martinez. Further examination revealed subtle signs of strangulation on her neck, leading the medical team to conclude that she had likely died from asphyxiation. Toxicology reports ruled out both alcohol and drug poisoning as potential causes of death. However, due to the poor condition of the body, it was impossible to determine whether Natalia had been sexually assaulted, leaving the possibility open. One particularly disturbing detail emerged during the examination. Natalia's body had been bound with nylon thread. The experts were unable to determine whether this binding had occurred before or after her death, adding another layer of mystery to an already perplexing case. Despite the extensive autopsy, many questions remained unanswered. Yet, it was clear that Natalia had met a violent end, and the investigation now focused on finding her killer. Though the discovery of Natalia's body provided closure to her family, it also marked the beginning of a new phase in the investigation. Because Leonardo was still under suspicion, and new evidence pointed to him, detectives faced mounting pressure to solve the case and get justice for Natalia Martinez. A few months after the discovery of Natalia Martinez's body, the case took a dark and unexpected turn. Ruben Olive, the man who had originally discovered her belongings by the side of the road, was found dead near his home at the base of a cliff. At first glance, authorities were inclined to label it as a suicide. But those close to Ruben, including his family and friends, were adamant that this was impossible. Ruben was deeply religious, cherished life, and was devoted to his family. He had never shown signs of despair or suicidal thoughts. An autopsy later confirmed their suspicions. Ruben had died from blunt force trauma to the head, sustained before his fall from the cliff. It was clear now. He had been murdered. His death raised chilling questions about whether it was connected to Natalia's case. As if that wasn't tragic enough, the next loss sent further ripples of sorrow through the Martinez family. Natalia's father, Everett Martinez, fell into a profound depression following his daughter's death. He was haunted by the grisly details of her murder, as well as the malicious rumors spread by the media, some suggesting that Natalia had ties to criminal activity. Unable to cope with the weight of his grief and the incessant public scrutiny, Everett took his own life. He shot himself in the head at his home. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife, deepening the trauma for the family. The police quickly closed the case, confirming that Everett's death was a suicide. The family, while devastated, did not contest this conclusion. For months, the investigation into Natalia's murder stalled, and it seemed like there would be no justice. But in 2010, nearly 3 years after her death, detectives stumbled upon new evidence that reignited the case. This new lead came from an overlooked source: Natalia's personal correspondence. The messages, exchanged with a close friend just days before her death, revealed that she had met a man online who she was planning to meet at the club the night she disappeared. Astonishingly, detectives had missed this crucial information for years. It was unclear why it had taken so long to access Natalia's digital records, but the delay had cost the investigation precious time. As detectives reviewed the messages, they realized that the man Natalia had mentioned was one of the same 3 young men who had been pestering her and her friends at the club that night. These men had been identified early in the investigation, with several witnesses, including the bartender, pointing them out as behaving suspiciously. Yet, for reasons that were unclear, this information had been overlooked or dismissed. With renewed vigor, detectives tracked down and identified the 3 men. They were all slightly older than Natalia, and their involvement in the case suddenly became a focal point. When questioned, the men seemed nervous and confused. Their accounts of where they had been and what they had done on the night of Natalia's murder were contradictory. Their stories didn't match up, and this raised further suspicion. The police also managed to track down one critical witness, a girlfriend of one of the men. For her own safety, her identity was kept secret, but she provided crucial information. One of the men, Rodrigo Verchis, had confessed to her that he had been involved in Natalia's death. Rodrigo, 25 years old at the time, had been evasive from the start. During previous interrogations, he had lied to detectives, providing false information about his whereabouts. But this new testimony, combined with phone records that placed him at key locations near the time of Natalia's disappearance, painted a different picture. DNA samples were taken from Rodrigo, but due to the condition of Natalia's remains, they were of limited use. Nevertheless, investigators now had enough to consider him the prime suspect. Rodrigo was called back in for further questioning on June 8, 2010. His friends, who had been with him at the nightclub on the night in question, were also interrogated. They all denied having anything to do with Natalia's death. They claimed that after leaving the nightclub, they had hired escorts to continue their night of partying. However, Rodrigo's story quickly began to unravel. Initially, he denied ever having met or interacted with Natalia. But detectives confronted him with the damning evidence of her online messages, proving that they had known each other and had arranged to meet at the club that night. Under pressure, Rodrigo's facade crumbled. The next day, he returned to the station and finally told the truth. He admitted that he had met Natalia online and that they had exchanged messages before agreeing to meet at the club. However, things hadn't gone as he had hoped. As the night wore on, Rodrigo became frustrated that their conversation wasn't going well. In the early hours of the morning, he suggested that they leave the club and go to another venue nearby. But this was a lie. His real intention was to get Natalia alone. Rodrigo then led her to a remote area under false pretenses, intending to take advantage of her. The investigation had finally uncovered the truth, but it left everyone with a bitter sense of injustice. Rodrigo had lured Natalia away from her friends with ill intentions. When Rodrigo began to harass Natalia that night, things took a dark turn. According to his confession, she rejected his advances, and he claimed to have accepted it calmly. He further stated that Natalia suffered an asthma attack due to the excitement, followed by convulsions. Without her inhaler or any medication, she tragically died in front of him. Rodrigo claimed that he was confused and panicked, unable to offer any help. His fear intensified when Natalia stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, Rodrigo was supposed to return to his family's farm near the city, but faced with a dead body, he chose to cover up the incident rather than seek help. On a road toward the woods, he pulled over, dragged Natalia's body deep into the trees, tied her up with nylon thread, and threw branches over her in a feeble attempt to conceal the crime. However, his story was riddled with inconsistencies, and many believed he was hiding the truth. A witness walking on the beach had previously claimed to have seen the pair engaged in intimate relations, and signs of strangulation found during an autopsy indicated coercion. It was highly likely that Rodrigo omitted a crucial detail, that he had strangled Natalia after failing to get what he wanted. His initial intention seemed clear. He had hoped for intimacy, and when rejected, things escalated. The forensic evidence suggested more than just an accidental death, but given the state of Natalia's body, proving molestation was no longer possible. What puzzled investigators was why Rodrigo hadn't called for help. If Natalia had suffered a genuine asthma attack, any reasonable person would have tried to save her life by contacting emergency services. A simple call for medical assistance might have saved her, or at least cleared his name. The fact that he hid the body instead of seeking help only reinforced the suspicion that he was hiding something far darker than he admitted. A key element that contributed to the confusion during the investigation was the car Rodrigo had been driving that night, a Chevrolet Corsa. Coincidentally, this car was strikingly similar in appearance to a BMW of the same era, especially in the dim light of night. Both vehicles were dark maroon, making it easy for several witnesses to mistake Rodrigo's car for the BMW belonging to Leonardo Radakovich, the bookstore owner who had been a prime suspect early on. This led to a string of false leads that wasted valuable time. Once Rodrigo confessed, however, his friends, who had been with him that night, were cleared of any involvement and released. Meanwhile, Rodrigo was placed under arrest, awaiting trial. His parents were concerned about his safety in prison, fearing retaliation from violent inmates, but the warden reassured them that he would be protected. At first, it seemed as though Rodrigo's confession would make the prosecutor's job straightforward. But in mid-2010, during preliminary hearings, Rodrigo recanted his confession, claiming he had only admitted to the crime under intense police pressure. He insisted that he was innocent. Despite his claims, his confession had been too detailed. He had shared information only the killer would know, including the exact location of Natalia's body. His sudden change of heart raised suspicion, but his defense team swiftly rallied behind his new plea. Rodrigo's lawyers attempted to dismantle the prosecution's case by arguing that he hadn't even been at the nightclub that night. They presented phone records and statements from his employer to suggest that Rodrigo had been working a shift that evening, making it impossible for him to have been at the scene of the crime. They further claimed that the following day, Rodrigo had attended a friend's wedding, where no one noticed any unusual behavior from him. The defense's argument took a hit when Leonardo Radakovich, who had been cleared earlier, was called as a witness for the prosecution. He testified that, on the night of Natalia's disappearance, she had repeatedly glanced away from him toward a young man in the club, now confirmed to be Rodrigo. This, coupled with testimony from Natalia's friends who identified Rodrigo, placed him at the scene, effectively discrediting the defense's alibi. The prosecution also leaned heavily on the findings of the medical examiner. According to the autopsy, Natalia's asthma could not have caused her death so quickly. While she did suffer from asthma, it would have taken hours, not minutes, for an attack to kill her. The more likely cause of death, based on the strangulation marks found on her neck, was manual strangulation. Unfortunately, due to the condition of the body, the medical examiner was unable to provide further details about the injuries, but the evidence that did exist pointed away from Rodrigo's story of an accidental death. 3 years of investigation had yielded enough evidence to challenge Rodrigo's claims. The prosecution argued that Natalia, a cautious young woman, would never have willingly gone anywhere with a man she didn't trust. This indicated that Rodrigo had either tricked her or forced her into accompanying him that night. Furthermore, the way he disposed of her body was cold and methodical, not the actions of someone in a state of panic. Forensic experts concluded that Rodrigo had likely killed her intentionally and then tried to cover up the crime by hiding her body in the woods. In the end, Rodrigo's attempts to claim innocence only added to the tragedy. His recantation cast doubt, but the overwhelming evidence, his confession, his detailed knowledge of the crime, and the testimony from witnesses pointed to his guilt. The question remained: would the court see through his final desperate attempt to escape responsibility for Natalia's death? Or would justice finally be served for the young woman whose life was cut short in such a brutal and senseless manner? The hearings for the murder of Natalia Martinez took place from late August to mid-September 2010. During the trial, the prosecution meticulously crafted a narrative, painting Rodrigo Vergés as the perpetrator with a clear motive for the crime. After examining the evidence and testimonies, the court found Rodrigo guilty of murder and sentenced him to 9 years in prison. Many believed justice had finally been served for the brutal death of Natalia. However, just a few months later, in February 2011, Rodrigo's defense team, led by his persistent lawyer, filed an appeal. The defense argued that the court's decision was fundamentally flawed and accused the prosecution of bias. According to the defense, the entire case had been fabricated, and Rodrigo was merely a scapegoat in a miscarriage of justice. In a surprising turn of events, on October 27, 2014, the appeal bore fruit. Rodrigo, who had only served 4 years and 2 months of his 9-year sentence, was eligible for parole. Despite the gravity of the crime, he was granted an early release, largely due to his good behavior during his time in prison. This decision sparked outrage, particularly among those who firmly believed that Rodrigo had taken Natalia's life. The swift release of a convicted murderer left many questioning the justice system and the weight it placed on punishment for such a heinous crime. Rodrigo's father, Miguel Vergés, was one of the most vocal advocates for his son's innocence. Throughout the trial and Rodrigo's incarceration, Miguel maintained that his son had been framed. He insisted that Rodrigo was not the murderer, and the court's decision was a mistake. Miguel's unwavering support of his son, combined with the early release, reignited rumors and conspiracy theories surrounding the case. The trial, already controversial, was now mired in fresh speculation. Some began to question whether Rodrigo was truly guilty, while others clung to the belief that Leonardo Radakovich, the bookstore owner and earlier suspect, was the real killer. Despite the court's ruling, the events of January 19, 2007 remain shrouded in mystery. To this day, the full truth of what happened that fateful night has never been definitively uncovered. Some details of the crime have remained elusive, leading many to believe that the true murderer may still be free. The unsolved murder of Ruben Oliva, the man who found Natalia's belongings and was later found dead at the foot of a cliff, has only added to the lingering doubts. His death, which many believed to be connected to Natalia's murder, was never solved. This loose end continues to fuel theories that the killer is still at large. The case of Natalia Martinez has since become one of the most controversial and debated trials in Uruguayan history. Many feel that justice was never fully served, and for some, there remains a deep-seated fear that the person responsible for both Natalia's and Ruben's deaths has yet to face the consequences of their actions.